We are following tonight radioactive iodine from that tsunami-rocked nuclear power plant in Japan showed up in drinking water at 3 Philadelphia water treatment plants. The discoveries were made at the Queen Lane, Belmont, and Baxter water treatment plants, but the Environmental Protection Agency says the water is not dangerous. Fox 29's Shawnette Wilson is in the newsroom now with a look at what is going on here with the water. Shawnette?
Yeah, Joyce, we are number 14 on the list of states to have radioactive iodine from Japan in our drinking water, but the headline here is that we have the highest levels detected of all those states so far. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency says no cause for concern by its standards, but as you can imagine, others will disagree with that.
For those who say this is below permissible limits or safe limits, there is no safe limit. All radiation is harmful, even at the lowest doses.
Joe Mangano with the Radiation Health Project isn't surprised that radioactive iodine from Japan is showing up in drinking water here in Philadelphia, but he is concerned. The amounts are the highest from Japan detected here so far in the United States.
It's a tricky thing to get your hand on. First of all, there's nothing to see, there's nothing to hear, there's nothing to taste or smell. Radiation is in the air and in the milk and the water, but you can't see it unless you detect it. So there's sort of a tendency to push it aside.
The report from the EPA states 3 drinking water samples from here at the Belmont Treatment Plant, Queens Lane, and Baxter contain iodine 131. But the EPA says the sample is still below its maximum containment level for iodine.
But let me ask you guys this. Raising the limits of safe levels of radioactivity has just taken place by our EPA. Why? Because they don't want to report that it's harmful when they find it in the waters. It's good for you now. Radiation is good for you. Just like fluoride treatments are good for you. Even though on the bag of fluoride it says that it's poison. And they're fluoridating the water. Along with all kinds of other things that would blow your mind. What our government does to us through the air, which we call chemtrails, weather modification. You're breathing it in every day. I bet you a lot of people out there listening to this don't even know what chemtrails are. Go try looking it up. Okay, here we go. EPA to raise limits for radiation exposure while Canada turns off fallout detectors. The mass radioactive contamination of our planet is now underway thanks to the astonishing actions taking place at the Fukushima nuclear facility in Japan. As of last night, TEPCO announced it is releasing 10,000 tons of radioactive water directly into the Pacific Ocean. That's 2.4 million gallons of planetary poison being dumped directly into the ocean. This water is being released because they have run out of places to keep it on land. It's too deadly to transport anywhere else, and all the storage pools around Fukushima are already overflowing, so they're dumping it into the ocean, then calling it quote-unquote safe, because they claim the ocean will disperse all the radiation and make it harmless. But because there's more radioactive water being produced every day at Fukushima, this process of releasing radioactive water into the ocean could theoretically continue for years, easily making Fukushima the worst nuclear disaster in the history of our world. Quick, fudge the numbers before anybody else notices. Fukushima, you see, is doing to the Pacific Ocean what BP and the Deepwater Horizon did to the Gulf of Mexico last summer, except that in the case of Fukushima, that radiation doesn't disappear with the help of millions of gallons of toxic chemicals. Nope. That radiation sticks around for decades. And by the way, the toxic chemicals and the mixing of the oil compounds are still in the Gulf and destroying the ecosystem as we speak. So, what do we do? If you're the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, there's only one option. Declare radiation to be safe. Yes, indeed, friends. We have reached a moment of comedic insanity at the EPA, where those in charge of protecting the environment are hastily rewriting the definition of radioactive contamination in order to make sure that whatever fallout reaches the United States falls under the new limits of safe radiation. The EPA maintains a set of so-called proactive guidelines, PAGs. These PAGs are being quickly revised to radically increase the allowable levels of iodine-131, a radioactive isotope. Not to mention all the other isotopes that are out there. There's another 11 or so radioactive isotopes that are coming across in the winds that a lot of Geiger counters can't really detect very well, by the way, to anywhere from 3,000 to 100,000 times the current allowable levels. Did you hear that? They're increasing the allowable levels of iodine-131 from 3,000 to 100,000 times the current allowable levels. So you're hearing that it's safe now because they've increased the allowable levels. When before it used to be really bad for you, if you went over a certain level, now it's okay. It's good for you. It's okay. It won't hurt you. It's all a lie, people. They are lying to you again. The group Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, PEER for short, is all over the issue, having obtained internal emails from a FOIA request that reveals some truly shocking revelations on the level of backstabbing betrayal happening inside the EPA. For example, under the newly revised PAGs, drinking just one glass of water considered safe by the EPA could subject you to a lifetime limit of radiation. In addition, PEER goes on to say it would allow long-term cleanup limits thousands of times more lax than anything EPA has ever before accepted. These new limits could cause a cancer in as much as every fourth person exposed. These new PAGs would also vastly increase the allowable levels of radiation in soil and food too. That way, when the radioactive fallout from Fukushima massive release of raw radioactive water begins to rain down upon the West Coast, the EPA can officially announce that all the radiation is below accepted limits. That's very comforting to many people, you see, putting them right back to sleep, not even realizing they're being radiated to death. And why is it below the limits? Because the EPA just raised the limits by as much as 100,000 times. All right, I'm not going to read the rest, but I'll just put it down here in case you want to stop the video and read the rest of this terrible, terrible thing that's unfolding in our midst. This is worse than Nazi Germany, guys. I'm telling you guys. And then I'm going to play the rest of that video. I'll put the link to this article underneath the video if you want to go back and read it for yourself.
Mangano warns, though, not to assume that means it is harmless. The reality is, this is the water we drink, cook with, and bathe in.
Cancer is the first one. Birth defects is another one. There are other infections is another one. But especially when we're talking about the infants and children, infant deaths, premature births, underweight births, babies born with an underactive thyroid gland.
The EPA doesn't recommend any precautions, but Mangano does.
How long this radiation Japan is present is totally unknown at this point because the meltdowns are still occurring. They have not been controlled yet. So it could go on for a while.
Would you say drink the water still?
Yes, but be careful, but be aware.
All right, so Mangano's wife is a nurse. She looks at it from a different perspective than scientific. She says filters on everything. Even before the fallout from Japan, she would recommend them, Joyce, but even more so than now.
Well, Shawnette, it's detected here in the drinking water in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Right.
There are reports of that radioactive iodine showing up in milk there. What next?
Good question. Who knows? Because the situation in Japan, as you know, still isn't resolved. Mangano told me iodine-131 in U.S. air and precipitation in March, 20 times greater than normal because of releases from those meltdowns in Japan. So no matter how small the levels, we've heard this time and time again, effects of radiation often take years to show up. So be aware is the key.
All right, be aware indeed. Shawnette Wilson, thank you so much from the news.